welcome to another episode of Iconic Freedom, the Formula. We are setting the standard for accountability and responsibility, the ownership of your choices and the consequences for those choices. Let each care for self, and all will be cared for.
The Matrix is a system, Neo. That system is our enemy. But when you're inside, you look around, what do you see? Businessmen, teachers, lawyers, carpenters, the very minds of the people we are trying to save. But until we do, these people are still a part of that system, and that makes them our enemy. You have to understand, most of these people are not ready to be unplugged. And many of them are so inert, so hopelessly dependent on the system, that they will fight to protect it. Were you listening to me, Neo? Or were you looking at the woman in the red dress?
I was...
Look again. Freeze it.
This isn't the Matrix.
No. It's another training program designed to teach you one thing. If you are not one of us, you are one of them.
What are they?
Sentient programs. They can move in and out of any software still hardwired to their system. That means that anyone we haven't unplugged is potentially an agent. Inside the Matrix, they are everyone, and they are no one.
The Matrix series is one of my favorite series, I gotta tell you. That and Lord of the Rings. I've actually watched that trio of movies. Gosh, I can't even tell you how many times. But I just revisited The Matrix this past weekend, and I'm currently in the third one. But I did want to watch the first one because every once in a while I like to revisit the movie because it reveals things to me that I didn't know before, or that maybe I hadn't yet assimilated, I hadn't really contemplated, or my own comprehension, to be honest, my own health, where my health has gone in the last 25 years since that movie was made, for me is pretty remarkable. But one of the things that I like to talk about with regard to the Matrix is to talk about the idea of what it is, and then can you also see what you're living in? That the idea that it is this kind of dream world, the Matrix, of what is built to keep us under control. And I don't get all woo-woo about it, but just in being able to have the analogy of understanding that the system that you're living in right now, the system that you're living in, that you're existing in, in the United States most specifically, that the government that you live in, that when he talks about, that this is a system and the system is our enemy, unfortunately. So, all those hundreds of years ago, when we started out this grand experiment of a republic, we were hoping that it was going to go in a particular direction. So let's apply some of our own standards and our principles of accountability, responsibility. Everything moves in one direction or another. And even in this movie, which I thought was interesting, the Oracle says at one point, everything has a beginning and everything has an end. And I have said on the podcast many times that all relationships end. And the reality is everything will end because we live in a finite universe. So one of the things that I really like to talk about is when Morpheus is talking and he says that the very minds of the people that we're trying to save are caught in this system. And until they are able to break free of that system, they are the enemy. Now, obviously it's not a sense, well, it could be, I suppose. It's not a sense that, we're going to start a civil war kind of thing, but it is a reminder to us that you are existing in a system right now that is awakening everyone at a different moment in time, in different capacities. There are people that are awakened beyond where I am, which I completely understand. Of course, there are. There are people that are not awakened, on the continuum from where I am, in one direction or the other. And the thing that I love about my own life is how I come to discover that awakening and how it just keeps revealing itself to me more and more. Why does it do that? Well, we don't care about the why question, and we're going to get to that later, to quote the Oracle. But what is happening is the piece that we want to focus on, and what is it that happens for me to be able to have the capacity, the comprehension, the cognition to be able to have the awakening, to expand it out from my own internal universe. Think of your internal universe as that pond where you can toss a pebble and it ripples out. That pebble, that moment for yourself internally becomes an understanding for yourself that the happier that is within you, the more it ripples outside of you. If the universe within you is a happy universe, it will ripple outside of you, and you will start to see it more and more and more. It will ripple out further and further and further. It pushes away, if you will, the negativity because your mind, your comprehension, your cognition about the world around you has changed. You no longer, because you take responsibility and accountability, you no longer are bound and constricted by rules or ideologies or self-righteousness or the right and wrong of things. You're no longer bound by societal pressures to conform. You see your freedom as your freedom. And the more of that freedom you have and that liberty, the more you want others to have that and enjoy it as well. And as you continue to go down this road, and it gets cleaner for you, if you will, then what happens is you start to see the people that have glimpses of it, or the people that have more of it, similar in fashion to where you are. And then you see the people that don't. You see them as constricted and unhealthy and lacking vibrancy. Some of what I talked about last week. Why is all of that important? Well, we don't care about the why. What about it is important. And the what about it that is important is to understand that it all begins with you. This matrix that you live in, this system that you live in, the minds of the people that you are interacting with. This is the thing that has to come clean for you. A lot of people, they will focus their energy and their time and, they're debunking things and they're talking about things or they're trying to push other things. Okay, so think of it this way, that, there are many factions in our world, right? In our United States. Let's take that as an example. And they're pushing in one direction or another. They're either pushing towards freedom or they're pushing towards control. Now, you can look at these things and evaluate that for yourself. And as you go through your week this next week, it would be lovely if you have the opportunity to start passing it through that prism. To ask yourself, when somebody is touting a policy or an idea or a thought, is that about control or is that about freedom? When you find yourself agreeing with the statement, not the person, because the person may have just something coming out of their mouth that just happens to be reality. Reality is what? Reality is the lack of emotion. It is the absence of emotion and the ability to see clearly what is happening, which direction that you're going in. So one of the things that I like to talk about with this is that when you see this happening and you're able to push it through this prism, you can start to know for yourself, am I moving towards control or am I moving towards liberty and freedom? How do you know if you're going in one of those directions? This is the standard. This is the formula. This is you figuring out the choices that you make, the accountability for those choices, and being able to understand the choices, which brings me to my next clip.
Candy?
You already know if I'm going to take it?
Wouldn't be much of an oracle if I didn't.
But if you already know, how can I make a choice?
Because you didn't come here to make the choice. You've already made it. You're here to try to understand why you made it. I thought you'd have figured that out by now.
I really do like the scenes with the Oracle in each of the movies, which is kind of fun. But she makes the comment and says, you know, you're here to figure out why you made this choice. I have said often, and I look at things through the prism of the why is an opportunity to lie. It is an obligation to the person that is not awakened to the reality to lie because they're trying to make an excuse. That particular activity can manifest in so many ways. I couldn't possibly cover them all. However, I will say, when a person starts to give you a why, ask yourself, try, if you can, to separate the story that they're giving you from asking yourself in what they're talking about right now. Are they attempting to tell me something just because it's interesting? Or are they attempting to give me a why because they are lying about whatever their motivation and their self-interest is? So it's kind of a foolish question. To ask a why question is a foolish question. That's part of the distraction that people, they wind up kind of falling into in the why. They fall into that distraction because it becomes an emotional thing. I would even say to you, my hypothesis is that a why is not just an opportunity to lie, but it is an emotional response. The what question says, what do you choose? And what are you going towards in your choice? Which direction are you going in your choice? What is it that you are wanting? It doesn't matter why, it matters what you choose. Why do you want to choose? Or why did you make that choice? No, what do you want to choose? Having made the choice, what do you want to do next? A lot of people then they get stuck in a why and then they don't go anywhere with it. Or they get stuck in a choice that they've made and then they think all the choices end right there. It's like, well, no, because there's another choice right after that choice. The people who try to figure out why, I'm going to say another hypothesis of mine is that they will always choose poorly. And the reason is because they're choosing out of emotion. They're not choosing out of observation. They're not necessarily choosing out of accountability and responsibility. They're not choosing through a paradigm in their head of those two pillars of the formula. There's no correctness. And so then what can happen is instead of, choosing through accountability and responsibility, then they choose through the antithesis of those, which is the lack of accountability, the lack of responsibility, the lack of consequences. There is no correctness in that. Instead of why, it is what I want. You can rely on your choices being correct, the healthier you are. But you have to know yourself. Some people want, and so much of their wants are unhealthy. The more you experience your health, the more reliable the choices, and even what appear to be the wrong choices will actually be correct choices for you, because there's a lack of confusion for you, because you realize I'm making this choice, I'm going to see where it goes. I know that it could be an inaccurate choice for me, but I'm going to go down that road to see how does the body respond, how does my universe respond. One of the things that the Oracle mentions later on is that we can never see past the choices that we don't understand. You don't understand because you don't see them as choices. Only when we develop comprehension can we then see that there are options for us. Otherwise, it's an incorrect preoccupation, or it's an incorrect perception because it's rooted in emotion. And of course, last week I spoke about this. When you get into your emotion, it jettisons all this toxicity into your bloodstream, and it basically, clouds everything. People have freakouts because they've been programmed, and they don't know how to be unprogrammed, if you will. Going into the matrix, taking the red pill, making those moment-to-moment choices, and reminding yourself, I am accountable and responsible for every choice that I make. So much to talk about on this subject, and these movies, as a matter of fact. So the other thing that I wanted to bring up is when you start to have your awakening, and how does that come about? Because for everybody, it's different. I'm going to say that I have never seen an awakening from anyone that has been instantaneous to the point where everything and anything has come into full comprehension. That is not possible, because what I observe is if that were to happen, it would probably explode your brain, because that's a lot for the brain to comprehend, the cognition for all of it to assimilate all at once. All those things take time. You can observe nature, and that nature takes time in development. Yes? You can apply that to everything. Look around at all the things that are worthwhile, that have quality to them. They are all things that develop over time. Anything that looks like it's jettisoned into the stratosphere, you can rely on it. What goes up will come down. So then, what information is it that you need to move to your awakening? What is the moment that you have that inner authority that goes, that seems kind of odd and interesting? What action could be taken or shown to support you or another individual's epiphany to be awakened. If people continue to believe a lie, what is their motivation and self-interest in that continuation? I find it fascinating that if there are no consequences for choices made, then nothing ever changes. And the message that you would send to yourself, or that others send to themselves, or that they would conclude is, I can live a consequence-free lifestyle. But we know that's not true. Right? Because if a person is like stupid, right? If they've developed no cognition, then they're going to think, I can jump out of a plane without a parachute because there are no consequences. But you know that that is not true, that there is some little tiny semblance of cognition and comprehension that could still be in the brain. But one must do what? One must move towards the comprehension, the responsibility, the accountability, and away from the lack of both of those. To have the one means the absence of the other, and the absence of one means that you're indulging in the other. If you have the absence of accountability and responsibility, then you will have a problem in life. You will always be hitting the speed bumps, and those speed bumps will eventually turn into fences and beyond that. So when you pay attention, you look at this, you can see that liberals have a diseased mind. That's not to say Republicans, conservatives don't as well. Some do. They're emotionally driven, which jettisons through the bloodstream a toxicity which exacerbates atrophy of development. That individual will lack logic and reason, comprehension, and cognitive ability. What people will sit there and go is, that person is so smart. They are instead sinister and diabolical, devastatingly evil, which replaces that cognitive development. This last clip that I want to play, and I know this podcast is running a little long, but gosh, this stuff is so fascinating to me. I never get tired of it. And if you're a person that's listening to this and you want to have a conversation with me about it, let's set something up so that, we can chat and have a live conversation that we can make as part of the podcast, because I think it would be fascinating. But this last one is about a person that has had their own awakening politically, and I think this is really fascinating. You can go to the clip and on Rumble and listen to the entire one, but this is just a snippet of it.
So I'm happy to tell you how I went from being super woke to voting for Trump. For one, I voted for Obama because I wanted gay marriage, and then I became super woke from there. I lived in a deep red state in the South, and I decided I wanted to move to Portland, Oregon, of all places. So I moved to Portland about maybe 10 years ago now. When I moved to Portland, I became vegan. I also was one of the pioneers of calling Trump supporters racist and all of those other words, right? Because I was reading a lot of fake news, a lot of headlines, and seeing people like Jimmy Fallon and these other talk show hosts repeating this rhetoric, and I fell for it because I didn't know much about politics. But either way, I lived in Oregon. I lived in Portland, Oregon, and I was vegan, and I actually went to a lot of these protests, these peaceful protests. I never did anything violent. I always stayed away from these people. But I firsthand started to witness the violence and the rhetoric coming from BLM and Antifa. This is before I ever even considered voting for Trump. My breaking point with the Democrat Party was when everyone but Tulsi raised their hand on a debate stage saying that they would offer free health insurance to illegal immigrants and that they were pro-open borders, and calling people like Donald Trump racist for wanting safe borders, which is kind of weird because now Kamala is saying that she's going to close the borders and hire more people and all this stuff. The same stuff she called Donald Trump racist for, mind you. She's full of shit. They're lying, blaming the border issue right now on Trump. I will say that, but that's not the point of this video. The point is, I started really paying attention to Trump. I started listening to a lot of my friends, many who were minorities who supported Trump, who I myself were like, oh my God, you're racist if you follow Trump, blah, 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 blah. The woke mindset bullshit. And I realized Trump's not that bad, and he's definitely not as bad as these socialist Marxists in the Democratic Party. The Obama-era Democrats are gone, and they have been replaced with extremists like Kamala, who cannot tell the difference between a man and a woman. So I rejected a lot of the nonsensical, men can be women, blah, blah, blah. I do not at all agree with sexualizing or mutilating children's bodies. I think it's absolutely disgusting. So there's nothing that the Democrat Party. But as I started looking into Donald Trump, I started realizing that everything I had been told about Donald Trump was a lie. Straight up a lie. It was just smear campaigns. A lot of it brought on by the RNC and GOP, others brought on by the DNC, and a lot of it was just fake news media, clickbait crap, right? So the more I looked into Trump, the more I liked Trump, and the more I realized his policies are going to be the only thing that saves this country.
So as in the other podcasts that I've done where you've seen clips about people, you saw one with Amber Rose and some others, what is it? We go back to the questions that I was asking earlier in the podcast. What is the information? What is the moment? What is the action taken or shown that supports a person's individual epiphany to be awakened? And the thing that keeps coming up is what? Their ability to access information. Wow. So how interesting is it that there are factions out there that want to limit information? It's an amazing connection, isn't it? I mean, I tell you, I always post this on X. If you're not following me on X, you know, my handle's down below on Truth, all the rest of that shenanigans. But people limiting information for you to be able to awaken, for you to be able to make a choice. And now we circle back to the very beginning of this podcast when we talk about what is the Matrix. It is a computer-generated dream world that keeps you under control, according to the movie, right? It's a system, and that system is the enemy because the very minds of the people that those who are awakened are trying to save, they are still a part of the system. The ones who are not awakened are still part of the system, and they are the enemy. So how remarkable that the very thing that you need to become awakened, there are factions out there trying to limit your information. So now, the rabbit hole. And how far down the rabbit hole do you want to go, as Morpheus had kind of outlined? I'll tell you, the more you go down the rabbit hole, the cleaner it gets, the more beautiful it is when you get to the other side, the more beautiful your life, the happier you will be, the ease of life, the ease of your choices will all unfold. And that music once again means we are at the end of another podcast. Thank you again for joining me. I hope you're enjoying this. If you get a chance, check out The Matrix. You'll really love it. Hit that like button if you would. Share with your family and friends. You never know how they might have their own epiphany. Let each care for self, and all will be cared for.